Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear participants. Welcome to the third webinar in preparation for SBSTTA 24. And I would like to invite SBSTTA Chair, Ezequiel Benitez, who will chair this meeting today. I think same dynamic way he did last sessions. And Ezequiel, floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope all of you are fine and healthy. Many of you attended previous webinars in preparation for SBSTTA 24 and SBI 3 held during 2020 and the past 2 weeks. Today, we finish the series of webinars with a SBSTTA 24 information briefing to provide you with more information on the pre-session documents table for the actual meeting. At the outset, we would like to invite Ms. Elizabeth Maruma Mrema, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, to provide us with few remarks. Elizabeth, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's my pleasure. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever we are. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you today and to officiate this meeting in preparation for SBSTTA 24, where you will be receiving information on 4 very important agenda items that have social, economic, and environmental bearing for the work of the Convention as well as its protocols. To this end, today's discussions will enable us to wrap up the series of information webinars organized to better capture all agenda items for the discussions at the upcoming SBSTTA 24 meeting. And today, we'll specifically focus on agenda item 7 on biodiversity and agriculture, agenda item 8 on the program of work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, agenda item 9 on biodiversity and health, as well as lastly, agenda item 10 on invasive alien species. Starting with the soil biodiversity, agenda item 7 on agriculture and biodiversity, a particular focus will be on soil biodiversity. Although less attention is paid to the biodiversity beneath our feet, soil biodiversity, the rich diversity of soil organisms, drives many processes that produce food, sequester carbon, and purify water, among many other functions and services. Discussions at SBSTTA 24 will have an opportunity to underscore the critical role of soil biodiversity and the ecosystem services it provides for the implementation of post-2020 global biodiversity framework, as we discuss solutions that soil biodiversity can provide to the different problems in different fields, including agriculture, environmental conservation, and climate change adaptation and mitigation, among others. In this regard, SBSTTA 24 will consider the draft Plan of Action 2021-2030 for the International Initiative for the Conservation of Sustainable Use of Soil Biodiversity that we see as one of the instruments that will accompany and support the next 10 years of action on soil biodiversity in support of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Our deliberation will be based on the report produced by our colleagues in the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, the FAO. And at this juncture, I will sincerely like to thank FAO for the invaluable support they've continued to provide us all on this subject matter. Our joint work is yet another example of our strong collaboration, partnership, and synergies of our work. Next, we'll move to IPBES, and this is where the work of the convention and its protocol in many areas is hugely benefiting from the assessments run by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. Many of those assessments have been widely used in the process of developing the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We welcome the rolling work program of the platform up to 2030 as approved by the IPBES plenary, with the appreciation that the request of the Convention's Conference of the Parties set out at its last meeting that has been fully met. In particular, 4 new deliverables have been produced by IPBES, namely the Nexus, Transformative Change, and Business and Biodiversity Assessments, and technical paper on biodiversity and climate change, all align very closely with this specific request. Moreover, even though the post-2020 global biodiversity framework is still under development, it's clear that each of the topic of these planned assessments will highly be relevant, and therefore it is envisaged that they will support the implementation of the framework. The subsidiary body will equally consider the request for the second global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services with regard to the scope and the timing of the assessment to ensure that it addresses the needs of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Given the need to strengthen the monitoring and review processes of the convention, a potentially relevant area of work not yet considered could involve its methodological support to help and assist in monitoring and reporting at national level of the status and trends in biodiversity and ecosystem services, as well as of the drivers of their changes. I would like to take this opportunity and express our deep gratitude to our colleagues at the IPBES Secretariat for their support and constant cooperation on these assessments. The webinar will also be introduced to Agenda Item 9 on biodiversity and health. In previous decisions, you may recall, parties to the convention recognize the complexity of interlinkages between health and biodiversity and the need for biodiversity inclusive One Health approach, among other healthy holistic approaches. COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us of the intrinsic yet delicate connection between human, animal, and planetary health, demonstrating the consequential impacts of the loss and degradation of biodiversity, which increases the risks of disease transmission from wildlife to people. To further investigate the relationship between biodiversity and pandemics, we organized a special SBSTTA as well as subsidiary body of implementation session last December to discuss biodiversity, One Health in response to COVID-19. As we head towards the post-2020 biodiversity framework, SBSTTA discussions will further promote mainstreaming biodiversity and healthy linkages in the next decade, especially in the context of Building Back Better agenda. In this regard, SBSTTA will have an opportunity to consider the global plan of action for biodiversity and health, which is currently under preparation. I would like to commend the work of our partners of the Interagency Liaison Group on Biodiversity and Health, particularly the World Health Organization, for their contribution and leadership in shaping this critical agenda, as we urgently need to restore humanity relationship with nature in the next decade. Lastly, the agenda item 10 on invasive alien species will be looked at. Invasive alien species are direct drivers of biodiversity loss, and threatens to animals, plants, human well-being, and our socio-economic development. They also affect the cultural values associated with biodiversity. The good news in relation to the Aichi Biodiversity Target 9 is that parties to the convention have made good progress to identify and prioritize species, although the rate of introduction of invasive alien species has no sign of reduction yet. The convention has already delivered various guidance on invasive alien species, and SBSTTA 24 will consider additional advices produced by our ad hoc technical expert group and through the report on broader sectors collaboration on classification and labeling of environmentally hazardous organisms. I'm sure that the presentations we will hear today will be useful in allowing you to get familiar with the information that has been produced for these 4 agenda items and which has been captured in the documents that have been prepared for SBSTTA 24 meeting. I'm sure that with the support of the Secretariat and the guidance of our SBSTTA Chair and the SBSTTA Bureau, this webinar will allow you all to be even further familiar with the content and documentation of these agenda items, all of which will be beneficial for your preparations for the upcoming discussions during SBSTTA 24. I wish you all fruitful meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary, for your warm welcome remarks and for being here with us today. I trust that this series of webinars will put us in a better position to have fruitful meeting of SBSTTA 24. And thank you for your support in facilitating these webinars in preparing SBSTTA meeting. It is clear with the topics you just mentioned, the activity and the collaboration of our convention with other important institutions such as FAO, the World Health Organization, and IPBES. So we will see this during this session. Let's proceed with the agenda for today. The agenda for SBSTTA 24, as you know, has 8 substantive agenda items. Last week, we covered 4 of them. Agenda item 3 on scientific and technical analysis and indicators of post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Agenda item 4 on synthetic biology. Agenda item 5 on risk assessment and risk management of living modified organisms. And agenda item 6 on marine and coastal biodiversity. As you just heard from our Executive Secretary, we will cover the 4 remaining substantive agenda items on biodiversity and agriculture, the program of work of IPBES, biodiversity and health, and invasive alien species. From the 4 agenda items we saw last days, I'd like to tell you that all these webinars can be listened from the CBD website. First, we will address agenda item 7 on biodiversity and agriculture. We will hear from Secretariat on key documents for this agenda item. The second presentation will be on agenda item 8 on IPBES. Similarly, Secretariat will present on documents for this agenda and also highlighting how CBD can benefit from the work of IPBES platform. The third presentation will be on agenda item 9 on biodiversity and health, during which the Secretariat will give an idea of the direction of the document being still under crafting at this stage. The fourth and last presentation on alien species, the Secretariat will provide a presentation on documents prepared to support SBSTTA discussion on this topic. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that this webinar is intended to assist parties and observers in becoming familiar with the documentation for SBSTTA 24, its structure and key elements of content. and to respond to questions from participants on those topics. It is not a negotiation session, and as such, the draft recommendations, which are elements to support SBSTA deliberations, will be discussed during the formal SBSTA meeting and not at this webinar. The statements and views expressed during the webinars will not be considered part of the official work of SBSTA. After each presentation, we will have time for you to ask questions. You can ask at any time. To do it, please use the question window located at the right of your screen. So we've been doing this the last days. I would like to inform you that this session is also being recorded and will be available at the website of the convention later. With those remarks, I would like to move to the first agenda item for today, item 7 on biodiversity and agriculture, and I hand over to Secretariat for the presentation. Caridad, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and just bear with me. I will be sharing my screen in a moment. And you should be able to see my screen at the moment. Okay, and I will turn off my camera just to ensure that that internet is stable. So thank you, Chair. I will now give the presentation on document CBP/SBSTA 24/7-1, which relates to the review of the International Initiative for the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Soil Biodiversity and updated plan of action. As you've mentioned, this relates to agenda item 7 on biodiversity and agriculture. So the document has an introduction and is further divided into 3 main sections and 2 annexes, as you can see in the slide. And I will be providing more detail on each of these sections throughout the rest of the presentation. So the introduction provides background information on the mandate for this document, and this is based on the following decisions. First, the document recalls decision 6/5 of the Conference of the Parties, where the International Initiative for the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Soil Biodiversity was established. The document also recalls decision 8/23, where COP adopted the framework for action for this initiative. And then reference is also made to a more recent decision, that is decision 14/30, where the COP requested the Executive Secretary to do the following. First, to review the implementation of this international initiative in consultation with FAO and under the framework of the Global Soil Partnership. And secondly, to present an updated plan of action for the international initiative to be considered at SBSTA before COP15. It should also be noted that that in the same decision, in decision 14/30, it also invited FAO to consider the preparation of a report on the state of knowledge on soil biodiversity, and to do it in collaboration with other relevant partners and organizations, and to make it available for consideration by SBSTA. So section 1 of the document contains the review of the International Initiative for Soil Biodiversity, and this review was carried out through 2 activities. For the first activity, the Secretariat invited parties and other governments to submit information by completing a survey. This survey was designed jointly with FAO, and FAO simultaneously invited its member countries to take the survey. The survey received over 70 responses from parties and stakeholders like academia and other institutions. For the second activity, the Secretariat carried out an analysis through a desk review of national biodiversity strategies and action plans and of the 6 national reports. Some of the themes included in this analysis for the desk review included soil biodiversity, soil conservation, organic matter, and so on. So the review of the implementation of the initiative on soil biodiversity is based in these two exercises and with the information from these two sources. Section 2 of the document is an analytical overview which highlights some of the contributions of soil biodiversity to sustainable development and identifies the opportunities that it can offer in support of the post-2020 framework. This section underlines the importance of soil biodiversity and underpinning various functioning terrestrial ecosystems. And it also offers some evidence on some important links between soil biodiversity and, for example, food security, sustainable agriculture, health, water quality, climate action, coastal and marine ecosystems, and terrestrial ecosystems. And the links of all of these with the respective sustainable development goals. So the section also highlights how the conservation and sustainable use of soil biodiversity can contribute to the successful implementation of the post-2020 framework. Section 3 of the document contains a list of suggested recommendations that SBSTTA and COP may wish to adopt, and these mainly focus along the following lines, basically on adopting the draft plan of action 2020-2030 for the initiative on soil biodiversity, which is contained in Annex 2, and that we will, I will provide also a bit more information in a couple of slides. It focuses on welcoming the report on the state of knowledge on soil biodiversity and the summary for policymakers, which is contained in Annex 1. Again, I will also give a bit more information in a few slides. And these were prepared by FAO and other important partners. It's inviting also FAO and the Global Soil Partnership to facilitate implementation of the plan of action as it has previously been done. And it invites parties on a voluntary basis to implement this plan of action and to provide information on a voluntary basis in alignment as well with the post-2020 framework. So now we move on into the annexes of this document, which are quite relevant. Annex 1 is the summary for policymakers from the report on the state of knowledge on soil biodiversity. As you recall in one of my first slides, this relates to the invite to FAO to prepare such a report. So this is the summary for policymaker of this report is contained in this annex. And the summary stresses the importance of biodiversity for food security and nutrition, especially above ground biodiversity such as animals and plants. And it really it aims to raise awareness of the importance of soil biodiversity by highlighting its role in finding solutions to some of today's global environmental challenges. The full report is contained in an information document number 8, and I will also touch upon this towards the end of my presentation. So finally, Annex 2 of the document contains a draft of the Plan of Action 2020-2030 for the International Initiative on Soil Biodiversity. And the Plan of Action is based on the review of the initiative, which is included in Section 1, as you have seen. It is also based on the findings of the status of the World Soil Resources Report, and on the preliminary findings of the report on the state of soil, on the state of knowledge on soil biodiversity prepared by FAO. It also incorporates feedback received through the peer review process. So the plan is organized in 6 sections, as you can see in the slide. We will not go into full detail into all of these sections, but I would like to draw your attention to some of the key elements and recommended actions included in Section 5 of this draft plan. So these actions have been clustered around 4 main elements, which relate to policy coherence and mainstreaming, to encouraging the use of sustainable soil management practices, It also relates to awareness raising, sharing of knowledge and capacity building, and finally on research, monitoring and assessment. So the recommended actions within each element, and if you see the document, there's a list of actions under each one of these themes. They offer more detailed guidance that have been put forward for consideration, and with the idea that this will ensure the conservation and sustainable use of soil biodiversity. So to finalize my presentation, as I had mentioned, we have an information document, which is the full report on the state of knowledge on soil biodiversity. This report was prepared by FAO in collaboration with the Intergovernmental Technical Panel on Soils, the IPBES, the Global Soil Partnership, the Global Soil Biodiversity Initiative, the European Commission, and the Secretariat of the Convention of the CBD, our involvement. And again, in response to decision 14/30, which invited FAO to prepare this report, both the report and the summary for policymakers were officially launched on 4 December on the occasion of World Soil Day. And it is a result of a contribution from over 300 scientists from around the world. It was really quite an undertaking, and quite, it's a document that I really invite you to look at. It brings the most up-to-date information and science on soil biodiversity. And with this, Chair, I finish my presentation and I hand over to you. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Caridad, for this very clear presentation showing the elements of document 7, which is a revised version. I think you made a very good presentation. So I open the floor for questions from participants. Remember to use the window on questions so we can address them. Please use the question. Oh, this was very clear, the presentation. And I'd like to also highlight the importance of our collaboration with FAO, not only on the matter of biodiversity of soils, but also the mainstreaming biodiversity strategy into agricultural sectors, which includes forestry, fisheries, and agriculture. And together with the work on soil biodiversity, I think is a good example of synergies and the many decisions we can take in our countries. And this is part of the recommendations of the document on the specific matters, and also the adoption of the initiative in the annexes of the document. It seems there is one question there. Secretary, can you read it, please?
Thank you, Chair. I actually have not received any questions yet. The one you're seeing is just a comment.
Oh, there was a comment. Okay.
Oh, I do have a question now, if I can have the floor.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. First question that I have here is, how will soil biodiversity be integrated in the global biodiversity framework?
Okay, that's a question, and maybe similar to some questions we had last week as well. This is part of how co-chairs in zero draft, or what is going to be draft 1, will be reflect. I don't know if Caridad want to add something on what we have already there, but I'm sure this should be adequately reflected in the zero draft. So that's why it's so important to have feedback from Substan SBI and the negotiations at the third meeting of the open-ended working group. We should remind that this document is responding to specific decisions from COP, and not necessarily on purpose going for post-2020. This is part of our ongoing work on soil biodiversity. I don't know if Secretary want to add something.
Thank you, Chair.
Seems
Just
like
to say that that is precisely the idea through the monitoring framework of the post-2020 framework, is that we see and we hope some elements are already reflected in there, and we see the plan, the draft plan of action, really as another instrument to really support and help in the implementation of the entire framework and its monitoring elements.
Thank you very much. Are there more questions, Secretariat?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As a follow-up to that one, I received a new one. How can the framework and the actions of parties put this work into practice?
Thank you for the question. I think in one hand, we should do our work with biodiversity soils as the document is requesting, and is in recommendations, make it very precise recommendations to be followed by parties. And also it's important to make it evident at the draft on post-2020, of course. But there is very precise collaboration that we can do in our countries, also with our agriculture ministries, under the collaboration between CBD and FAO, at least I would say. Are there more questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Although I would recommend that whoever would like to ask a question, just type it in the question box, because I'm receiving a couple just saying, how can I ask a question? So I'd just like to clarify that. But so the following question is regarding data. What data regarding soil quality will be prioritized? And in addition, how will Indigenous peoples' data on soil health be weighted?
Thank you. Caridad, would you like to comment on it, please?
Yeah, so this is going a bit more into detail of the draft plan of action, and there are various actions related to data. And I think this is going to be the draft plan of action really intends to provide guidelines, so parties and can implement them at the national level according to their context and their priorities and their national circumstances. However, there is provision to support this prioritization and to identify how to better monitor these data. Regarding the inclusion of Indigenous peoples and local communities, the plan also, as it is, the draft plan of action already contains provisions to allow to this knowledge and this information to be integrated into the knowledge that is being we would like to see being generated at the national level. And so we hope that at least with these elements already there, that then going forward into the negotiations and parties either strengthen these elements or go forward with this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Caridad. Actually, there are some paragraphs in page 9 and 10 making references to contribution of Indigenous peoples and local communities just before the recommendations in section 3. Next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. One question regarding process. Can reports still be uploaded as an information document for informing parties' decisions, and how?
Secretariat?
I think this can be submitted to the Secretariat, and this will have if they're addressed to the Secretariat, then they can be uploaded and presented as information documents and made available in our website as well.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. Next question is, will it be possible for SBSTTA to make recommendations to the open-ended working group for the Global Biodiversity Framework on soil biodiversity out of this item?
Thank you very much. I believe when we open for deliberations during SBSTTA, parties will have the liberty to to propose that. I believe first we need to respond to the specific request from the COP, and also I believe it could be a possibility to probably make one element on the CG's recommendation to the open-ended working group, just to ensure consistency. Good idea, thank you. Next one, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just need one moment. One question I have here is it possible to think on multi-purpose indicators that can be used by CBD and UNCCD?
Secretariat?
So in terms of the draft plan of action, the draft plan of action per se doesn't have indicators. So, however, we do make reference to our colleagues in the Convention on UNCCD, and we definitely reference the convention to make them part of this decision, and they were also involved in part of the elaboration of this document. If we talk about the post-2020 GBF, I think there has been an important exercise to try to bring these various perspectives. So I think that's, as I understand, trying to look for synergies.
Thank you very much. I should remind you that there is the Global Soil Partnership with englobes a number of institutions already working on it. Pretty sure the certification is there. And now at this moment is also a consultation on Burn 2 about the synergies among the different biodiversity related conventions, looking forward for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. But thank you for the question. Next one, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. One more question here is, given the updated timeline of SBSTA and other meetings because of the COVID situation, when is or was the deadline for information documents?
Secretary, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's open time for at any moment to present information documents. Usually, pre-session documents should be at least 6 weeks in advance from the formal meetings. So there is plenty of time to submit documents, information documents so far. This is usually the practice, but correct me if I'm wrong. If there is no correction, please move to, let's move to the next question, please.
Maybe it would be best to remind everyone to keep the questions short because I have several questions that are in different sections. So I would just need a minute to consolidate those.
Yes, thank you. And I see that we are running out of time. Please, this will be the last question. So we need to move because we still have 3 more documents to be revised during this 1 hour and 20 minutes remaining. Yes, Secretary, it's doing a work of interpretation of questions.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, the long question ended up being more of a comment, so I think we can move on.
Okay, thank you very much, candidate, for helping us with this document. Let's move to agenda item 8 on the program of work of IPBES. So again, candidate.
Thank you, Chair. I will also be giving this presentation wearing a different hat, I guess. And if you also bear with me, I will share my screen. And
good, we can see it.
Okay, do you see it in full screen? Yes, I think you do. Okay, so again, I will turn off my camera just to ensure that it all flows smoothly. So I'm now going to give a presentation on document CBD SBSTTA/24/8 on the program of work of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. The document contains 5 sections and 1 annex, and it's also supported by an information document. You can see that each of the sections outlined here in this slide, but as with the previous presentation, I will provide a short overview on each one of these sections. So as with other documents, section 1 provides some background information and describes the mandate for this document. The mandate stems from COP decision 14/36, which welcomed IPBES progress in implementing its first program of work, and it invited the platform to further consider requests as part of its program of work for the next 10 years towards 2030. So decision 14/36 includes 2 other requests to the Executive Secretary related to the modalities for the systematic consideration of all deliverables of IPBES with a view to optimizing their support of implementation of the convention, and to consider proposals to be considered and included by IPBES in its program of work towards 2030, and with the aim to support implementation of the post-2020 framework. Moving on to section 2 of the document on the systematic consideration of deliverables of the platform, which focuses on how the modalities of work between the convention bodies and the IPBES have worked. They have worked well, positively. And just to remind everyone that these modalities of work are already set out in decision 12/25. So this is also outlined and it's substantiated by the overview provided in this section as well, of the overview on how all IPBES assessments and reports have been considered by SBSTTA on its advice, and they have also been welcomed and endorsed by COP. And for example, we have the assessment on pollinators, pollination and food production, which was considered by SBSTTA and COP and was used as the basis of the update of the plan of action for the international initiative for the conservation and sustainable use of pollinators. This is decision, you can find this in decision 14/6. So other assessments that have been considered by SBSTTA and COP include the report on scenarios and models of biodiversity and ecosystem services, the report on land degradation and restoration, the 5 regional assessment reports on biodiversity and ecosystem services. And you will see here in the presentation and also in the document a table that includes information on how SBSTTA and COP have used these and considered and adopted all these reports. And finally, we also have the global assessment report on biodiversity and ecosystem services, which has really laid the scientific foundations for the 0 draft of the post-2020 framework and has, as you all very well know, informed the work of the open-ended working group. So again, the main elements of section 2 focus really on the modalities of work that already exist, how these are proving to work, and it also outlines that these working modalities have been positively recognized and noted by a recent IPBES review, which looked at the engagement of IPBES with the biodiversity-related conventions. So now section 3 provides an overview of the rolling work program of the platform up to 2030. And this includes 3 ongoing assessments. And this includes the assessment on values of nature, biodiversity and ecosystem functions, or what is being called as the values assessment, a thematic assessment of the sustainable use of wild species, and a thematic assessment on invasive alien species. It should be noted that these started within the first program of work. So section 3 further describes the assessments that were included on top of the ones that I've just mentioned in the rolling work program, and we heard from our executive secretary mentioning these assessments. So these are the biodiversity, water, food and health nexus assessment, the transformative change assessment, business and biodiversity, and a technical paper on the interlinkages between biodiversity and climate change. Additionally, and considering the extraordinary situations caused by COVID and giving the role of IPBES in that IPBES can play really in strengthening the knowledge base on biodiversity, the IPBES platform organized a virtual workshop on biodiversity and pandemics, which was held in July 2020, and it produced a report which we've listed here as well. So this was also made available during the special virtual session of SBSTTA and SBI that was held last year on health and COVID. And just very briefly, before I move on to describing the next section of the document, I would like to draw your attention to a notification that was issued on January 22nd, encouraging parties, observers, and stakeholders as appropriate to take part on the different review processes or call for nomination of experts for some of these reports as they are, given their importance. There's various calls, and you will find all the details on this notification just to make you aware of this. Now, section 4 draws on the basis that the 4 new deliverables are highly relevant for the post-2020. So we're talking about the nexus assessment, the business and biodiversity, transformative change, and the technical paper on biodiversity and climate change. And that SBSTTA may therefore wish to recommend to the COP that it specify its request for a second global assessment on biodiversity and ecosystem services to ensure that it addresses the needs of the post-20 global biodiversity framework. Finally, it highlights that within the request, a potentially relevant area of work that not yet considered could involve support to help and assist monitoring and reporting, methodological support for monitoring and reporting at the national level. So finally, section 5 contains recommendations that SBSTTA and COP may wish to consider. These are along the following lines. First, welcoming the rolling work program, the ongoing assessments, and in general, the work of the platform. Secondly, noting that the platform will consider requests, including for a second global assessment. And thirdly, inviting the platform to consider providing support on issues, again, just previously mentioned on methodological issues regarding monitoring and reporting, including at the national level, but also to consider strengthening cooperation with regards to, for example, data knowledge, capacity building, and indigenous and local knowledge. So the annex of this document provides some information on the usefulness of national ecosystem assessments and how they provide evidence-based, they integrate views from different sectors, and they help policymakers in identifying and better understanding priorities at the national level. And it also highlights the work of the United Nations Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Center, and it gives a bit more information on what is being done on this regard and the capacity development activities. So finally, to finish my presentation, I also want to draw your attention to information document SBSTTA 24/inf/17, which provides information on updates on the work of IPBES since we last have our last SBSTTA 23, and includes a complete timeline of the various ongoing assessments, and provides as well information on the next session of the IPBES, which will be held in June later this year. So with this, Chair, I finish my presentation, and again, I hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Caridad. Very didactic, your presentation on the elements of the document by sections and annexes, and information documents relate to the work of IPBES. As you can see, the documents present past assessments and tools developed that are useful for our convention, current assessments, and how we can keep working together in the future under this rolling program once we define the contents and elements and monitoring framework for post-2020 global biodiversity framework, including the suggestion as a potential area of work on monitoring and reporting, and invitation at national level to make progress on ecosystem assessments. So I open the floor for questions on this document. Remember to use the window and to write very short ideas with questions. We invite you to write questions rather than comments, please, so it can facilitate the work of our colleagues in the Secretariat in interpreting questions. Secretariat, do we have some questions already?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The first question would be, what sort of support is intended in relation to national monitoring and reporting? And is this suggested as an IPBES methodological assessment or support from a task force?
The Secretary would like to respond. I think this is part of the annex of the document.
Yeah. So that will be good to have a different type of support, working closely with the Secretariat of IPBES as well as with experts, and the task force may provide significant input into the process. And again, as Ezequiel mentioned, the directions of work is very much outlined in the annex to the document, which includes also elements of capacity. And if you look at the document, the IPBES Secretariat and CBD Secretariat were working together also on raising capacity at national level to support countries in their efforts for national assessments, but also national reporting and monitoring.
Thank you, Secretariat. Next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. One technical question regarding data ownership. Do contributors of data to IPBES or other facilitators of CBD measurements retain ownership of their data?
Secretariat.
So I'm not sure about the rules within IPBES, but my understanding is that, of course, all data provided continue to be the ownership of the data providers and the data owners.
Yeah, that's a question that probably should be referred to the IPBES Secretariat. CBD uses and collaborates with IPBES in many points and assessments and tools, but that's something more internal on that. Next question, please.
Thank you, Chair. Not sure about this one either, but what is the procedure for submitting suggestions or national assessment reports to IPBES?
So I think that this question will be better answered by the Secretariat of IPBES. what are the procedures and rules there, and how the information from national assessment can be used within IPBES for the purpose of specific assessment under the program of work for IPBES. So, but again, those procedures are established within the IPBES itself.
Right. What is important is, as far as possible, that every country has its own country biodiversity country study, and even some countries goes even deeper into subnational level to have ecosystem assessments that can help in decision making. If we can combine methodologies using both bodies, IPBES and CBD, that would be very helpful to implement national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Are there any other questions?
Just one moment. Yes, in section 5 of the pre-session document on strengthening capacity building, is there any collaboration for development of capacity between countries or agencies?
Secretariat.
So I'm not sure capacity building between countries and agencies. We definitely through the CBD we work closely in supporting capacity building for countries that include cooperation with other UN agencies or actually other appropriate organizations, if that's what means under agencies. Not the national agencies, because we are not providing much of support within the country as at the national level. But we have numerous programs of cooperation, again, as I mentioned, not only with UN agencies, but different organizations, whether it's academia or research centers or NGOs, on many topics, which again are very relevant to assessments as well. And almost every time when CBD Secretariat is engaged into organization of capacity building activities, whether it's workshops or programs, we always do it with partners. So, and we encourage partners also to work directly with countries in support of the institutional capacities, but also, of course, the individual capacities for particular experts. I also see the question related to inclusion of annex into this document. So a couple points there. First of all, conference of the parties was encouraging very much the development and running the national assessments at national level. Also, we believe that national assessments is a very important source of information which can be captured by IPBES and used in their assessments. And again, in view of also moving towards implementation of post-2020 global biodiversity framework, the information received at national level will be pretty instrumental for the process of review and monitoring. And we believe that this type of information is very relevant, and the process is very relevant to assessment under IPBES. So that's why the annex was included. So, and again, we know that our partners, including UNEP, WCMC, is also doing a very good work with a number of countries, actually helping them to understand and raise capacity in developing national assessments and collection of national data. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Of course, national and subnational information is key for national reports. that were the basis of GBO5 and also serve for IPBES assessment. And of course, if we are considering a second global assessment in the near future, it will be very important to see connections with fresh data coming from countries at national level. So this guidance in the annex can be very useful if implemented to update and to see implementation at national level and the status at national, regional. There is, I do remember during the last two conferences of the parties, it was a capacity building section. It was a long work on identification of priorities on capacity building, and also many activities by regional offices of UNEP, for example, are doing along the year. So I invite you also to take a look on those documents to see these opportunities of cooperation between countries and other agencies. I don't see there is more questions, Secretariat. Please correct me. Otherwise, I propose to move on the next document.
Thank you, Chair. That is correct. However, I would just like to carry one over from last presentation, just very quickly. Could you clarify if presentations from previous webinars will be made available online?
Please, go ahead.
Yes, all presentations from previous webinars, two of them last week, both presentations but also recordings of those webinars will be available online. And of course for this one as well, not today, so but in the coming days, yeah.
If Secretariat can put in the chat the link, because I saw it. So I can confirm I saw by webinar, there's there is the recording and all presentations already posted. So if you can share the link so participants can verify on the various elements. Thank you very much, Secretariat. Let's move to next agenda item 9 of SOSTA 24 on biodiversity and health. So I'd like to give the floor back to Secretariat for the overview of documents for this agenda item. So Letitia, you have the floor. I think you're mute.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. It's a pleasure to be presenting today the preparation of elements for agenda item 9, as I recently joined the convention to work on health and biodiversity linkages. So I would like to share my screen. If you can kindly bear with me for a moment. And I also have deactivated my camera.
We can see the presentation.
Yes, excellent.
Just need to maximize the.
Yes, thank you very much for your patience. So excellent. Let me start by providing you the context of agenda item 9, which stems from decision 14/4 on health and biodiversity, which was adopted at the 14th meeting of the Convention of the Parties. In this decision, the Executive Secretary was requested to develop several activities with a view to further mainstream health and biodiversity, which include integrated science-based indicators, metrics, and progress measurement tools, targeted messaging approaches on mainstreaming biodiversity for the health sector, a draft global action plan to mainstream biodiversity and health linkages into national policies, strategies, programs, and accounts, the promotion and facilitation of dialogues, regional and sub-regional capacity building workshops on biodiversity and health approaches, and the compilation of documents as well as the exploration of a mechanism to facilitate access to scientific literature and other reports on health and biodiversity. So the Convention's approach to health and biodiversity for SAPSTA 24 builds on decision 14/4, but also takes into account the context of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Letitia,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you. I think that slides are not moving. And also,
Okay.
if you switch to the presentation mode, and because we still have the first slide. Yeah, that's now.
Is it working now? Okay, excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Sasha.
Health and biodiversity for SBSTTA 24 slide.
Yes, thank you. So as I was mentioning, COVID-19 has further highlighted the importance of the relationship between people and nature and the interlinkages between pandemics and biodiversity. So in this context, the proposed approach for health and biodiversity for SBSTTA 24 will build on the multiple interlinkages between health and biodiversity, and also the biodiversity inclusive One Health approach among other holistic approaches. But it will also consider the context of COVID-19 and the agenda regarding the risk of regarding reducing the risks of future pandemics. And at the same time, recognizing the common drivers to biodiversity loss and negative health outcomes. The proposed approach will also take in consideration opportunities for mainstreaming health and biodiversity as part of the Build Back Better agenda and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The Convention also continues to engage on this topic through the joint program of work with the World Health Organization and the Interagency Liaison Group on Biodiversity and Health, whose second meeting was held in May 2020. And on this note, the Secretariat would like to thank its partners from the Interagency Liaison Group, and in particular the World Health Organization, for the excellent collaboration and for their leadership. So building on this approach and the work of the Interagency Liaison Group on Biodiversity and Health, we are now preparing the pre-session documents on Agenda Item 9, which will be made available for SBSTTA 24 formal meeting. So the documents, the main document also include an annex, which is a global action plan for biodiversity and health, which I will present in the next slide, as well as an information document. I will now move to the next slide and hope you can see it, but it doesn't seem that is the case. I'm sorry for that. Yes, I think you should now be able to see the next slide. So as mentioned, we are now working on Agenda Item 9 pre-session documents for SBSTTA 24 formal meeting, which will be divided in 4 sections.
Sorry for interrupting you, so we are still on the same slide.
Can you see now the correct slide, the pre-session documents? Yes. So as I was mentioning, the documents is divided into 4 sections. So the first section recalls the requests made to the Executive Secretary formulated in Decision 14/4, while Section 2 provides a context of the interlinkages between biodiversity and health in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, with reference to the Build Back Better agenda. The Section 3 is a summary of activities and updates, which will include an overview on science-based indicators with reference to the post-2020 biodiversity framework, as well as targeted messaging approaches. It will also provide an update on dialogues and capacity building workshops which have been organized and activities related to information sharing. The section number 4 is the standard section on suggesting recommendation that SBSTTA may wish to adopt. And in addition, there will be an annex document, which is the Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health that we are currently working on. In addition, there will be also an information document, which will synthesize the key messages on mainstreaming health and biodiversity interlinkages. So while in section 3, there will be an overview of the targeted messaging approaches, the information document will provide further details. I apologize, for some reason there's a slight issue with the slide deck. I think you should now be able to see the slide with the timeline. One second. Yes.
Just the title.
Yes, excellent. So I would like now to walk you through the timeline of the preparation of Item 9 documents for SBSTTA 24 formal meeting. So at the moment, we are Sorry, would you mind giving me just a minute, as I think there might be a slight issue. Yes, just a second. Yes, I think you can now see the slide, right? The timeline for Global Action Plan. Thank you. Okay, so we are today on the 2nd of February for the briefing on SBSTTA 24 documents. And subsequently, we are going to share the draft Global Action Plan with WHO and the Interagency Liaison Group for Biodiversity and Health. So the draft document will be then issued for peer review for 4 weeks, and member states and parties will have an opportunity to also provide their comments. And this will coincide with the informal meeting of SBSTTA 24. We will aim at completing the draft documents for them to be made available for SBSTTA 24 formal meeting. So those will be made available 6 weeks prior to the meeting. Before we close the presentation, we wanted to provide an overview on the existing resources and key materials developed by the Convention and its partners to drive and advance the agenda of health and biodiversity, including in light of the COVID-19 pandemics. So we'd like to start by referring to the State of Knowledge Review, which was published in 2015 on connecting global priorities, biodiversity and human health, as well as the guidance on integrating biodiversity considerations into One Health approaches, as well as the Global Biodiversity Outlook in its 5th edition published last year, which also includes a section on the biodiversity inclusive One Health transition. We also would like to refer to the special virtual session for SBSTTA 24 and SBI 3 on biodiversity, One Health and COVID-19 as 2 discussion documents and one discussion document and 1 technical information document were prepared. And lastly, we also would like to refer to reports to which the Convention has contributed, including the reports by UNEP and the International Livestock Research Institute on preventing the next pandemic, as well as the IPBES workshop report on biodiversity pandemics. And finally, WHO's manifesto for healthy recovery from COVID-19, which includes a section on protect and preserve the source of human health, nature. So we thought this would also be helpful for the audience to have an overview on those reports and activities either led by the CBD or to which the Convention has contributed. And those documents will also inform the preparation of the SBSTTA 24 formal meetings item 9 documents. So this is the end of the presentation. I apologize for the little glitch at the beginning, and I would like to thank you for listening and remain at your disposal, Chair, for any questions the audience may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Letitia, and welcome to the club. Now, we have time to address questions for participants. Please use the window if you have questions on the preparation of this document on biodiversity and health, a very contemporary issue we're facing now. Please use the window for questions. We saw the timeline for preparation and the various considerations, and also a list of important documents related to this topic.
Chair, we have one question in the question box, if may I ask.
Yes.
Do you have an estimated date for the 4-week review?
Secretariat?
Sure. So we are planning to issue the peer review at around the same time than the informal meeting of SBSTTA 24, and the peer review will be for a duration of 4 weeks. So around mid-February, we expect the document to be available for peer review.
Thank you.
And we have another question here. So it's asking about where is the document itself? So this is the subset 24 document? Just a general question.
Leticia?
Sure. So the documents are currently under preparation. So we understand the concerns that there have been some delays in producing those, but we are very much now working on those with the view to finalize them as soon as possible and with the view to consult the parties and partners on the production of those documents. So currently it's not available because it is still under elaboration.
Thank you for the clarification. Are there more questions?
Nothing at this moment.
If there are no more questions, I think everybody is looking forward to see the document when it will be posted by the Secretariat, including the phase of peer review as indicated in the timeline. Thank you very much, Leticia. And now let's move to the last agenda item.
Pardon me, Chair, there are some questions coming up now. Do we have time to address them?
I think we do. Yes, please go ahead.
So the first one is, will the document focus mainly on COVID or will it have a broader approach on health?
Secretariat?
So in line with the decision 14.4 of the parties, the documents will reflect on the multiple interlinkages between biodiversity and health. But as explained in the presentation, we will also have a specific section, the section number 2, which will also provide the context of COVID-19 and really use also COVID-19 as an illustration of the linkages between biodiversity and health through the lenses of pandemics, and also reflect on how we can also build on the lessons from COVID-19 to build back better. So, so the documents will be reflecting on the main linkages, but at the same time, there will be a specific section on COVID-19. I don't know if Sasha also would like to complement, but otherwise, yes, this is this is the insights on the structure of the document.
Thank you very much, Secretary. We should remember that this agenda item is also a response to a decision from the last conference of the parties on biodiversity and health. So this will be a hybrid document responding to what we received as a mandate in 2018, plus the new circumstances related to COVID-19. Is there any other question?
Another related question is, will the document also refer to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and inputs to that?
Secretariat?
Absolutely. There are also 4 targets under the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which are also related to health. So we are very much looking at interlinkages and at maintaining health also as part of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So just, for example, to give you a few examples on some of the health targets which are included in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, we have a reference to reducing pollution, also to health benefits for the most vulnerable, as well as the access to green and blue spaces and the contribution from biodiversity to health. And then finally, also targets on preventing adverse impact of biotechnology for biodiversity and health. So we are very much looking at linking the documents and the actions on biodiversity and health with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Seems that we have more questions, are we?
Yes, so will this agenda item also be discussed at the informal meeting of subset 24?
We will not have, I believe, sorry, Chair, if you wanted to comment, yeah.
Go ahead, Leticia.
It is not planned to have item 9 at the informal meeting of SABSTA. However, it will be discussed at the formal meeting, and that's why also we are really working on the documents for them to be made available, and we are also conducting this peer review with the ambition to have it made available for the formal meeting.
Thank you for the clarification. So we have to wait for the formal meeting to have the pre-session document on health 6 weeks in advance, as we suggest. Next one, please.
Yes, sure, Chair. Would the Global Action Plan provide recommendations on how health and biodiversity related issues can be adequately included into the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework? For example, by providing a suggested target.
Sure,
that's our hope. Sorry, but that's our hope. As I remind you, the mandate we have in SBSTTA was to revise the monitoring framework, and all these recommendations will go to co-chairs, and we already have some elements on the draft 0, but we look forward to see draft 1, including these important contents. But Leticia, please, I'm sorry.
So as part of the Global Action Plan, we also are defining several activities. So right now we are looking at 6 strategic objectives, and each of those objectives will also have indicators, and some of those indicators will be the ones that are also used in the monitoring framework of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So we are very much looking into incorporating those indicators, and of course also in the documents, in the strategic objectives, we will be also identifying special recommendations and activities which also fits in that framework.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify that the Global Action Plan does not providing for any specific targets to be included into the framework. Again, this work is for co-chairs and the open-ended working group. And that's, of course, they can look at the suggested Global Action Plan, which again is designed to be also in support of implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, where aspects of health, whether we are talking about human health or animals health or plants health or ecosystems health, are actually already included into several elements of the draft targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. Do we still have more questions?
Yes, there's just one. Can you please clarify who are the experts working on the document?
Secretariat?
So I think as Leticia presented in the presentation, so that's going between CBD Secretariat, WHO, and also members of the liaison group. And again, it will be available for 4 weeks for peer review. So the comments coming from parties, other relevant organizations, and experts, so will be welcomed and incorporated into the final version of the document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're running out of time. We need to move to next agenda item. Maybe the last question, if there is any.
Yes, there's one last. So what points are expected to be covered by the SBSTTA recommendation in the document?
Sure. So yeah. In the documents, we are looking at continuing the definition of key messages, also to continue the work of the convention with the World Health Organization, and to continue to mainstreaming biodiversity and health interlinkages. But in addition, there will be the Global Action Plan that will very much also provide a way forward in terms also of implementation. So the recommendation also, one of the recommendations is also to endorse the Global Plan of Action, which will really be the main instrument for also driving this agenda forward. And as I mentioned, we are still working on those documents, so there might be a few more changes. But yeah, this is the broad overview.
Thank you very much, Leticia and Sasha, for responding on this very important document that I hope soon will be ready for discussion. There's a lot of expectations on this work, and the future collaboration with WHO, the One Health concept, and recommendations of this situation that we're facing, that we know is due to damage on biodiversity, what we're facing globally. Okay, let's move to last agenda item for today, which is item 10 on invasive alien species. So I give again the floor back to Secretariat for the overview of documents on agenda item 10. Please take the floor, Junko. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is the last item on invasive alien species, and we're going to present together with new colleague, Katie Millett. Next slide, please. Katie, could you move to the next slide? Thank you. This is a mandate the COP has given. COP has decided to establish an ad hoc technical expert group. The process is as follows. The first, to convene a moderated online discussion forum to support the deliberation of the ad hoc technical expert group. And then ATEG will meet and provide the advice or develop elements of technical guidance on management measures on invasive alien species to be implemented by broad sectors in order to facilitate achieving Aichi Biodiversity Target 9 and beyond. And in addition, COP requested the Executive Secretary to explore with the Secretariat of the United Nations Economic and Social Council, the World Customs Organization, and the Interagency Liaison Group on Invasive Alien Species regarding the possibility of developing a system of classification and labeling consistent and in harmony with other international agreements. Next, please. So before going to the pre-session document, I would like to touch on the overview of the progress made by the parties and the status of biological invasions globally. This is one good news that parties are successfully identified invasive alien species and removing mammalian invasives from islands. That was advanced. However, pathway management measures to prevent new introduction of alien species are in yellow according to the GBO5 in 2020. Next, please. At the same time, thanks to European Union for supporting development of global register of introduced and invasive species, and thanks to Invasive Species Specialist Group of IUCN and the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, those occurrences of the alien and invasive species information became accessible on the CBD country profile page on the clearinghouse mechanism. An important finding here is that experts revealed that already established alien species worldwide count over 22,000 taxa. And out of the 22,000, 4,000 species are validly reported as an invasive alien species. So considering the current number of regulated pests and pathogens that Secretariat was informed, please note the fact that large number of invasive species are still spreading unregulated manner under the existing national systems. And next, please. The experts has further analyzed that national regulations, and those were set in 70 countries by 2015, and taking into account that EU strategies on invasive alien species enacted in 2014, and numerous countries are updating the NBSAPs related to invasive alien species, it is likely to be that more than 50% of parties are either in the process of setting national regulations or already have some regulations. However, the experts further pointed that most of the existing regulations are relevant to controls on already established invasive alien species, and preventive regulations based on formal risk analysis need to be advised. With regard to the pathways related to pathway-related regulations, thanks to International Maritime Organization and its member states, that Ballast Water Management Convention and biofouling guidelines are providing technical guides for parties to prevent the invasive aquatic species from these pathways. Under the CBD, we now have a voluntary guidance to avoid unintentional introductions of invasive alien species associated with the trade in living organisms. And this provides that in a harmonious way to implement the measures together with existing international regulatory frameworks such as SBS agreement. So under such circumstance, next please. Next slide, please. Yes. An online forum was held from May through September in 2019, and various practices undertaken by parties and organizations were shared as a possible advices to respond to the COP requests, which is namely on the cost-benefit and cost-effective analysis, cross-border e-commerce, climate change and associated natural disasters and land use changes, as well as the existing database on invasive alien species. So the summary of those tools and practices made by parties and organizations were made accessible as an information document to ATEC, and that document is accessible at the ATEC meeting website. Next slide, please. So this is the most important information for SBSTTA to consider at the formal meeting. The annex to the pre-session document contains 5 advices, the technical advices given by the ATEC as they have concluded. The important finding of the ATEC was that scientific assessment of biological invasion risk and management measures to be prioritized and implemented at the national or local levels are the 2 separate processes. Annex 1 has taken into account this point, and the scientific analysis on the invasion risk based on the international standards and analysis on the cost of management versus benefit or cost effectiveness are treated as an evidence to feed into decision-making process, so that decision makers should consider multi-criteria, for example, social and economic impacts, or a possible consequence on cultural values associated with the local biodiversity. So that technical advice was slightly reorganized from the originally mandated technical advice and resulted in the Annex 1, Annex 2, Annex 3, and Annex 4. So other management measures against e-commerce, climate change, and shared databases on invasive alien species may also feed into national decision-making process that takes into account the social, economic impact and the possible consequence on cultural values. And in addition to these advices, the ATEG revealed that the existing international standards and guidelines relevant to invasive alien species that provide the basis of national regulations need to be explained for biodiversity authority of the country and their implementers to be able to communicate and collaborate with broad sectors. For example, SBS agreement and their standard methods. And the ATEG also highlighted in the same document Annex 5 that capacity development in taxonomic identification of invasive alien species, as well as for the harmonization of the national measures at the global level. So that these additional elements were included in Annex 5. So kindly note that each annex contains the outcome of the ATEG with the text as they have concluded, and SAPSA is invited to consider these outcomes. And the next slide, please. So the section 2 of the pre-session document contains a progress report on the COP mandated work on the classification and labeling on the consignment of living organisms. And this is to follow up the COP decisions on pet guidance and voluntary guidance to avoid unintentional introduction. Both CBD guidance indicated the importance of informing the hazardous nature of the commodity and its possible contaminants. So that CBD, in collaboration with the Secretariats of International Plant Protection Convention, World Organization for Animal Health, OIE, and World Customs Organization, as well as CABI and IUCN, submitted an informal document to the ECOSOC subcommittee of the experts on transport of dangerous goods to consider the inclusion of living organisms as environmentally hazardous goods. And the subcommittee considered, and the subcommittee will invite the Secretariat and other organizations to the upcoming meeting to further consider the possibility of inclusion of living organisms into its model regulations. In a separate process, the World Customs Organization also initiated consideration on living organisms and invasive alien species under the working group of cross-border e-commerce. As a consequence, WCO specification on the prohibited and restricted goods under the framework of standards on cross-border e-commerce included living organisms, invasive alien species, and sanitary and phytosanitary concerned goods, such as regulated pests and pathogens. Next slide, please. So the slide shows the list of documents presented on the SBSTTA website, and the invasive alien species technical specification under the World Customs Organization framework was taken up as an information document. So the outcomes filled with the national practices and other organizations, tools, etc., can be accessible at the ATEG meeting website, as well as outcome of the ATEG. That is all. Thank you very much. I hope this information helps, and the Secretariat is ready for any questions.
Thank you very much, Junko, for the presentation of the pre-session document on invasive alien species. As you know, this is a very important cost driver of biodiversity loss. We've been working for years, and we should continue working even harder. As you can see, there is a precise recommendation for the Conference of the Parties to welcome the outcomes of the ATEC, but also endorse guidance that is included in 5 annexes of this document. Now I open the floor for questions on this document on invasive species. Please, I remind you to use the question window, please.
Thank you, Chair. So there's a question here. Why is the report of the ATEC not available as an information document to SBSTA?
Secretariat, please.
Well, there was a sort of pressure to reduce the document. However, if it's necessary, I would like to hand this over to Sasha, whether it is possible to present as an information document. Sasha?
Yes, we can do it as an information document for SBSTA.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretariat. Can we move to the next question, please?
We have nothing right now on agenda item 10, but if we can go back to health and biodiversity, we have a question here asking whether this item will be on agenda item for COP. It's currently not announced.
Yes, there is no draft agenda for the COP yet on the website, as again also dates to be confirmed. So as a usual practice, when we are responding to the request from previous COP, so those elements are included into the agenda for the following COP. So definitely the elements related to health, as well as the draft action plan, will be presented for consideration by COP.
Thank you, Secretariat. So going back to invasive species, there is a call to include a new information document with the report of the ATEC of 2019 on invasive species. Let me remind you that already we have 11 pre-session documents and 27 information documents posted in the website for SBSTA 24. But we take note of the request. Is there any other question?
No, that's all for now, Chair.
Okay. Don't be shy, unless it's everything very clear on the 4 documents we revised today, the 4 agenda items of SBSTA 24. Okay. Seems it's not the case. So congratulations for the clarity and the presentation for the documents. Remember that the intention of this webinar is for participants to get familiar with the documents and the content, not to negotiate, but to be very clear where we are, to focus mainly on the recommendations from the documents. So this is what we're going to see on the informal sessions at the end of the month. Let's move then to the closing of these webinars. This brings us to the end of the last webinar of this series. I thank you all for participating today. I hope that you found it informative in preparation for SBSTA 24. If participants wish to follow on matters relate to these documents, Secretariat is available to answer questions and, if needed, to consider additional webinars in the future. I would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing and organizing the session of today, and our partners in contributing to the process. It was a pleasure to collaborate with so many experts at CBD Secretariat in presenting the various documents and content to you all. Again, thank you all for joining us today. I wish you all the best and see you by the end of the month at the informal meetings of SBSTA 24. This webinar is now concluded. Adios. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Thank you.